Chanja was seated and waited for her flight after 2 weeks. She was little anxious because that was her first aeroplane ride. Her mother made multiple attempts to make her feel better. Shanta gave her a nod and awaited her turn. She stood up and went to each person as the flight called out. She gave cheerful hug to her parents, brother, and father. She then moved in the direction of checking area. She gave them a final glance before turning away and waving. She then stepped on board the aircraft. Shanja sighed deeply as she sat back on her seat. She tightly closed her eyes and closed the window curtain. After some while, she slept out. The 12-hour flight to her destination was finally completed. She left the waiting area and began the seeking for a driver to pick up her at the airport. She was looking for someone when all of a sudden the individual whose name was written on the board caught her attention. A man in a black suit was waiting for her when she hurried there. He grinned as he gave her a look. He then collected her luggage and moved into the direction of parking lot. It was a glorious day with the chilling air hitting her face. She shut her eyes and enjoyed the lovely weather. They moved in the direction of the car as she opened her eyes and nodded at him. He loaded her belongings into the car trunk. She gave him a small nod before hopping inside the vehicle. They arrived at their destination 1 hour later. She exited the vehicle and admired the stunning home. He remained silent. As she moved close to the house, she noticed her name was written on the door side. Chances just hit the floor when she walked inside the house. Inside the house was lovely. There was a large TV lounge in it. She combed the entire house and began to beam with joy. She entered her room and began to unpacking her belongings. Totally concentrated on his future project, Jungkook was working on his laptop while sitting on his bed. He was drove away and his eyes felt heavy. He was no in mood for a nap at the moment. His back was supported by the pillow. His eyes began to felt heavy out of blue. He soon dozed off. Chanja's eyes were wide. It was the first time she had seen such a big company. She always heard about the company. Chanja stepped at the entrance of the company door and went towards the reception. As she saw a girl with blonde hair, she bowed to her in a order of respect. She bowed her back and said. Chanja nodded and sat in the waiting area. After some time, they called her. She went to their office, knocked on the door, and asked for permission. As she entered the office, she bowed to them. The young man was looking at her. As Chanja felt someone gaze on her, Chanja took a glance at her boss. He smiled a little and signaled for her to come near the table. She sat and looked at him. He smiled cutely, making her melt. Introduction of Wim Hante. He asked her directly and come to the point. She smiled at them slightly. He looked at his computer screen. He searched for her email and opened it. Chanja closed her eyes before giving an answer and took a deep breath. They smiled and looked at her because Hante finds her story have something which he wants in his company. Chanja became happy and excited. She gave him a cheeky smile. Hante asked his assistant about the agreement file, and his assistant nodded. After a while, he gave it to Chanja. Chanja took the file from him. Hante said to Chanja. She read the contract, and after a few minutes, she signed it. Hante stood up and also Chanja. They shook hands, and he said. She nodded and smiled and went out. He came close to her and gave her some files. Chanja nodded at him and started to reading the files. After a few hours, she signed on them and said. She took her bag and made her way out of the office. Chanja reached her car and made a call to Mr. Lee. After some moment, he came. He smiled and nodded. They sat in the car and Mr. Lee started the engine. They drove off. She was looking outside of the window, admiring the beautiful city. He thought for some time and said. She nodded at him and put her head on the window, looking outside. Jungkook was in the conference room with his friend. He was so tired but didn't want to take a break. His clothes were fully wet due to sweat. After some moments, Yoram told them to take a minor break. They all stopped their work and rested their back on the seat. Drinking water, Jungkook took his phone out and started scrolling it. Then one of his friends, Seokjin, snatched his phone and started to running all over the conference hall. Jungkook glared at him and warned him in a serious tone. Seokjin stuck out of his tongue and teased him. Introduction of Seokjin. Jungkook stood up and started to running behind him. They were running and no one wanted to stop. After some time, the Urim shouted. Both of them stopped and nodded at him. Seokjin gave him his phone back and patted his back. Jungkook kicked his ass and started laughing. Seokjin gave him a dead glare, making everyone giggle.